Hello and welcome to the Friday, February 11th, 2022 pre-Valentine's Day edition of On Iowa Politics. Support provided by New Pioneer Co-op, celebrating 50 years as Eastern Iowa's source for locally and responsibly sourced groceries, with stores in Iowa City, Coralville, and Cedar Rapids, and online through Co-op Cart at newpi.coop. Hi, I'm James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and with me today are Amie Rivers of the Waterloo Cedar-Falls Courier. Good morning, Amie.
Good morning, James.
Erin Murphy, State House Bureau Chief for the Gazette. Good morning, Erin.
Good morning, James.
And Gazette Opinion Editor Todd Dorman. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
This week, the other caucuses, a quiet week in the legislature, and legitimate political discourse. When people are talking about the Iowa caucuses, they usually are talking about the presidential election year circuses that attract the attention of the world. However, Iowa Republicans and Democrats had their off-year caucuses Monday with much less fanfare and much lower attendance. But Amie, that didn't mean there wasn't any enthusiasm, right?
No, there was some. I mean, as much as can be garnered with an off-year caucus, for sure. I went to the ones in Blackhawk County. I attended the UAW one. Obviously, Democrats hold a 2-1 voter advantage here, so there's a little bit more candidate speeches and things that were going on at this. So yeah, it was nothing like, your Iowa caucuses on a presidential year, pretty obviously, but they still get some 2-minute candidate speeches, 2-minute elected official speeches in there and try to drum up support. So it's still kind of what I would call like the unofficial kickoff to the campaign, if you really have one.
Was there anything that hinted at presidential politics?
The only thing that hinted at presidential politics was the idea that they did not want Trump to be president again in 2 years. So that's really the driver, I think, for Democrats. I don't know if they're necessarily talking about any other candidates at this point, and they're not really talking too much about Biden. So I think they're really just focused on the midterms.
Reports I saw indicated that some places had good turnout for an off year, while others saw very low attendance. I guess that's to be expected. Party building isn't nearly as sexy as launching the next president. Amie, you heard 1st District Democratic challenger Liz Mathis at the caucus you covered. She seems to think this race is competitive.
Yeah, she's buoyed right now by a Cook Political report that moved it from really solid Republican to only probably Republican. So that's part of it. She did mention on Monday that she was looking forward to trying to get out the 18,000 plus extra Democrats that are in the district versus Republicans. So based on that, based on her pretty decent fundraising numbers, obviously not the fundraising numbers that Hinson is pulling in, but they're not Dieter DeGier numbers. You know what I mean? Like she's running a pretty good race at this point. She's able to fundraise. She's got some polling that's moving in her direction. So I think all of that comes together and sort of is able to buoy her. And obviously we've got a lot of time till the next election.
Overall, Todd, what's the takeaway from these caucuses, from any off-year caucuses?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm surprised that they got the turnout they did when they were, going up against The Bachelor, which is on Monday nights. And I think there's broad bipartisan support, according to my research, that someone named Shanae is up to no good. So I don't know if that discussion bled into the off-year caucuses or not, but I think that's something.
Is that a Bachelor reference that we're supposed to?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not. My daughter went back to college. Otherwise, it would have been on TV in our house on Monday night. So I would have known more. So I'm giving you the few facts I could gather. So, but I suppose that it's sort of party organization and a little kind of a pep talk type situation as the election year starts, and Democrats would certainly need sort of a pep talk the way things are going. So if they came out of those caucuses feeling better about their chances, I think that would be a major accomplishment. But it's hard to say.
Amie, given Todd's Bachelor reference there, were there any roses at the caucus?
Liz got some good applause, so I think they would probably have given the rose to her. We also had Glenn Hurst there. He got a decent, at least people were listening to him generally. But I think maybe, he's got a tough road ahead of him, given that he's going to be taking on Abby Finkenauer, who is slightly more well known. So, and then the Republicans also had a caucus. We failed to mention that they spread theirs out a little bit just to give people a little closer caucus. But as a result, they had sort of less turnout. And again, it's an off year. They don't have any elected officials in Black Hawk County that are Republicans, so that's also going to be a factor in whether people come out. But I did hear that a couple former elected officials, like Margaret Klein, who is a city councilor, was also there. So. Yeah, not a ton of roses. And don't forget, you're competing against the Winter Olympics, so that's also a tough one.
Oh, yeah, the Winter Olympics. That's right.
Oh, yeah.
It was a quiet week in the Iowa legislature. Well, it started quietly as lawmakers took the day off Monday so they could be back home in their districts for the caucuses. But, Erin, they made up for the time off the next 3 days. A bill to live stream K-12 classes died. I guess Hulu wasn't interested after all. You covered a hearing on banning dirty books and jailing teachers and librarians. Will the PTA have to start raising bail money?
Well, if Governor Reynolds' proposal to give them all a $1,000 retention bonus goes through, maybe they can put that towards it. That's going to be interesting to watch going forward because it's different few bills that have been introduced on that topic. That's obviously the one that goes a little bit farther, allowing parents to, if they aren't satisfied with the response from the school district when they challenge these books, that they can then turn around and sue the teacher, the administrator, the school, and then if a judge rules in favor of the parents, that the teacher, that there would be penalties for that. It's pretty clearly going to pass committee because it's going through the Judiciary Committee, which Brad Zahn chairs, and he's spoken out on this and was on the bill on the subcommittee. So pretty clear that he'll move that through his Judiciary Committee. I assume he'll find the votes for that there. Beyond that, it'll be interesting because Jack Whitver and Pat Grassley, Senate Majority Leader and House Speaker, have both kind of kept their arm's length from this specific proposal. They've talked about wanting to focus more on transparency and have expressed hesitation about embracing, creating or enhancing penalties for teachers and librarians. So taking that on its face value, this bill doesn't have a future. But I know that from being in that hearing and from interviewing Senator Chapman, he is very passionate about this, and he's not no one. He's the Senate president. So it will be interesting to see moving forward, at the very least in the Senate. Pat Grassley doesn't have to care about that necessarily, but Jack Whitver is going to hear from his fellow Republican Senate leader about this, I'm sure, and it'll be interesting to see how far this goes.
And Erin, do I understand correctly that this bill sort of changes the definition of obscenity from sort of what has been the standard?
Yeah, so I am 99% confident in this, and it does not, for the purposes of in schools, it does maintain the current definition. The one place it did change it, as I was looking at the bill, is for like rentals. Then they don't like or and I can't remember if it was like purchase as well, but it was basically like in a retail setting, you don't have to the whole part, and I apologize as I'm stumbling over to explain this, the current definition of obscene materials has what's this kind of forgiveness that even if it may be deemed obscene to some people, if it has literary value or educational value, then it's not considered an obscene material. that piece remains in this bill as it pertains to books in schools and libraries. They did pull that piece out in the retail space. So like if you go to if it's in a store, that then I guess they could take it out and don't have to prove that it has literary value. But as far as the piece of it in school, and that would be huge, because if that ever did get changed, because honestly, that's what's enabling districts right now to, say, no, we're going to keep these books around, is because they can say, yeah, there may be a passage here, or one image that's maybe a little graphic, but taken as a whole, and that's another phrase that's in that part of the law, taken as a whole, it has literary or educational value. So if that were to ever be removed, that would significantly change that debate. But as I understand it, that remains even under Chapman's bill.
Folks championing medical freedom, not to be confused with free medical, are upset that they might have to wear a face mask or get vaccinated to protect themselves and others from a pandemic that has already claimed more than 912,000 American lives. Got a hearing, too. And folks worried that transgender girls will dominate the sports record books advanced a bill to require schools that get public funding to designate sports programs as one of the following: open to biological females, open to biological males, or coeducational. And in between that, the House approved $179 million in new money for K-12 schools. Anything in that list worth talking about, Todd? Amie?
Maybe the fact that like you'll need to use some of those reserves for like lawyers to challenge the court cases that are come, because they might be stepping on more than one federal law.
Well, there goes your tax relief.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I know a lot of Republicans are very worried now about girls' sports and women's sports. But I mean, let's face it. This transgender sports bill is. I mean, it's not about athletics. It's about politics. I think we all know that. I mean, this is an effort to target transgender kids with the hope that it whips up the base of the Republican Party, evangelicals and others that are made uncomfortable by this. I mean, I guess it's too bad they're uncomfortable, but it also they should be reminded that it's not really about them. It's about education and kids and civil rights. And we have a civil rights protection in Iowa for gender identity, although it doesn't apply to sports. So we've got a girls' union that has been dealing with this. I mean, the civil rights code was updated in 2007. So we've had 14 going on 15 years of gender identity protection. And this hasn't really become a real problem in Iowa. They can cite, an example in Pennsylvania or New Hampshire and this hypothetical situation where, 85 boys track runners transition and dominate the state track meet, which I think is a pretty big stretch to put it mildly. So, I mean, and we're seeing all of all of this crazy stuff around the state. I mean, I saw the Carroll School District had to put out a statement saying that they don't have litter boxes in their restrooms to accommodate students who identify as animals. The same rumor has gone around at Lynmar, where my kid goes to school. And as Erin mentioned last week, you had the person from Iowa Falls or from Hardin County say that, students are masturbating in the classroom. I mean, I think we've just kind of lost our minds in all of this. And this transgender bill is cut from the same cloth that people are just desperate to, make their discomforts into law and to, target these kids who already feel like they have a target on their back. It's pretty shameful, frankly, but it's not surprising. I mean, the governor has advocated for this, and I have no doubt they'll probably end up passing it.
I should just point out real quick for clarification and bookkeeping's sake, and one of the more interesting moments of that subcommittee hearing on the book on Senator Chapman's book bill, the young woman who apparently the student who apparently was the one who was I don't know what the verb here is, but she was sitting next to the student who apparently allegedly began masturbating during class, came and testified at that bill. So I think the larger point still here remains here, that a person who came to speak on school choice using one isolated incident as some broader issue of widespread students masturbating in public schools is, I think, still fair to point out is a little over the top and maybe even worth a little bit of the let's just be polite and say gentle ribbing it received online. But to in the interest of fairness and complete transparency, apparently that did happen according to this young woman who came and testified about it and so to answer your next question, intrepid listener, what does that have to do with books?
Yep.
I think and obviously I'm just reporting this. I'm not saying this from my perspective, but I think the link that was trying to be made, and we heard a couple speakers at that meeting say it, is that these books are creating a culture in our children that it's the whole downfall of society thing. So this kid was masturbating in class because these books are in libraries.
I thought
kids have been masturbating in class for years.
I thought the downfall of society, wasn't it? I thought jazz did that, or maybe rock and roll.
It was also jazz.
Elvis is hip.
Well, and one more point about the transgender bill. I mean, this is just a scare tactic, and we've seen these are the same folks that years ago told us that we couldn't let same-sex couples adopt children because it would harm children, and then we couldn't let them get married because it would destroy traditional marriage. Now, people would be marrying lawnmowers, right? Yeah, exactly. So now that if we have transgender rights, it's going to destroy women's sports. I don't know how many more times they can be wrong before we just maybe stop listening to them. But they have the ear of Republicans.
Because you might know better. How much of this is red meat? How much of this is really not actually going to get passed?
Yeah, and I saw something this week, and I wish I could remember now off the top of my head, so I can't cite the source or story, or maybe it was even just in conversation with someone, but they talked about it, and it kind of illustrates maybe a little bit of a difference in leadership style between the leaders we have now and Jack Whitver and Pat Grassley versus past leaders of either party at the State House, in that this is the time of year early in the session before that first funnel when any bill can be filed and any bill can be considered, that they're all still eligible. And this is when you sometimes get bills that most people will consider, on the extreme edges, again, in either political direction. And in the past, and this again, this person sharing the story cited a past leader who said, "Yeah, we got those bills all the time, and there was a specific drawer that we set aside just for them, and they went in that drawer, and you never saw them again." Whereas and that was interesting to hear, because the current leadership seems to be their process seems to be, go, you can file your bill. We'll even maybe let you have a subcommittee or even committee hearing, but knowing deep in the back of their minds, it's not going any further than that. But we'll at least let you have whereas in the past you wouldn't even get that subcommittee hearing necessarily on a bill. And now and again in to get at all of this, that did happen this week, James, as you know, on a bill you were set to cover, the cameras in the classroom bill, had a subcommittee scheduled, but they pulled it off literally right before that was scheduled to start. So it's just kind of an interesting, view of, different ways of approaching this from leadership and how to handle those bills that get a lot of attention, often for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and the business community has been pretty adamantly against all of these bills that would target transgender rights. They know discrimination is going to be a bad look for Iowa, and it's going to hurt their ability to recruit businesses and events. And I've seen people tweeting about I think the NCAA basketball tournament is scheduled to return to Des Moines in 2023. If something like this were to pass, that might put that in jeopardy. So
Yeah.
I think there's some momentum behind it, but I hope you're right. I hope they put it in the special drawer.
Well, and I should say on the transgender one specifically, that's a little bit different. That's going to pass the House. And I would be surprised, I guess, but I haven't. That's just me on my hunch. I haven't asked Senate leadership yet what its future is there. But Pat Grassley did tell us this week that one's going to get passed through the House. And you're right, Todd, about that. That would very much threaten future NCAA. I mean, they've done that in the past. I think it was North Carolina had a bill, and maybe Indiana as well, but North Carolina for sure. Yep, and even the ones that don't pass, there are people who have made the argument, and it's a pretty fair argument. You can absolutely appreciate it, that even just by those bills getting out there, and especially when they have a hearing, even if they're not going to eventually pass into law, they kind of have a damaging effect. Whether it's teachers who are feeling under attack by legislation or LGBTQ people. In the past, the tenure thing, the tenure bill, proposals to eliminate tenure, people say even by that bill just getting out there, even
regardless of what you think about any of those
effect.
proposals, there was, for the most part, what safely could be called legitimate political discourse, at least as defined before the Republican National Committee weighed in. The RNC censured on a voice vote Democratic sympathizers Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. In its statement, the RNC said that those folks in body armor, carrying a variety of weapons, and threatening to hang the vice president were engaging in legitimate political discourse.
Whew. I'd hate to see what's illegitimate.
Todd, that seemed to be a pretty broad definition for the party of law and order.
Yeah, that was, almost surprising, I guess, that they would tack that on. Then they tried to walk it back, but it was basically too late at that point. I mean, it's just another example of the lengths that they're willing to go to try to, convince Americans that what they saw on January 6, 2021, they didn't actually see. That those videos of police being beaten with, everything they could get their hands on, flag poles, people with Confederate flags in the Capitol, people trying to smash into the House chamber and entering the Senate chamber, and vandalizing offices and spray painting inside the Capitol.
Some defecating done.
There was defecating too. There was, which is I saw
legitimate.
someone that's in trouble. They had a video of themselves in the Capitol, yelling some stuff, and then so they broke into the Capitol, took a video of themselves breaking into the Capitol, and then decided they'd take a video of themselves smoking marijuana in the Capitol. So, I mean, some of these folks were not thinking clearly, but
they didn't send our brightest that day.
Yeah, and there's a rift in the Republican Party. There are Republicans who don't agree with this, but the problem is they're either tap dancing around it or just remaining silent, while these other folks who want to revise the history are sort of in charge of the messaging and grabbing most of the attention. And the base loves it. Polls show they believe the election was stolen and that Donald Trump isn't responsible. And Chuck Grassley got a question the other day at a town hall from someone who asked him about the FBI being in charge of the whole thing, the insurrection.
Three-letter government agency again.
And he sort of stepped around it and didn't really, there was no John McCain moment where he's like, "You're wrong. That's not right. That is not right. You're wrong." Nothing like that happened. So, yeah, I mean, this is the strategy to sort of de-emphasize that this was a big deal and, sort of protect President Trump and show your loyalty by doing so.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell seemed to disagree with the RNC. He rejected its characterization of the January 6th attack, calling it, quote, a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election from one administration to the next, end quote. Erin, is McDonald's target the RNC or is Old Crow using this as another jab in his running feud with former President Donald Trump?
Maybe a little of both, which is usually my answer to almost all questions. Yeah, I mean, Mitch McConnell has been so interesting on this. He's, depending on your viewpoint, if you want to be generous, you could say he's trying to answer honestly when he can and still protect the party when he feels that's also necessary. And a maybe more cynical or skeptical view might be that he's just trying to have it both ways and tap dance down that fine line. But he has been interesting to watch on this, in that in cases like this, and this isn't the first time, that he has kind of said the things that, if we're being honest here, we need more people and especially more Republicans to say it clearly on this and what happened that day. He has been willing to say those things. Does even he say it often enough or go far enough? I think that's a fair question or argument too. But he's at least been out there a couple times and on the record, and has been willing, to your point, James, to take on and challenge and push back at President Trump on this.
Well, and it's one thing to say what he said, but it's another thing to, then, I mean, they're okay with prosecuting these people that, went to the Capitol and describe it as violent and stuff, but then they block at every turn any effort to get beyond that to see if there was anything else going on ahead of the insurrection, what the origins were, who knew what, all those sort of things. So yeah, it's good to condemn it, but it's up, you don't want to get to the bottom of it because you don't want to, Americans to know what really happened.
Meanwhile, Senator Chuck Grassley seemed to echo McConnell, asked whether the January 6th insurrection was legitimate political speech or an attack on American democracy itself. Grassley said, "It's just like any other crime committed breaking into a federal building, and you'd expect people to be punished for it." He went on to say that the RNC's beef with Cheney and Kinzinger is unimportant to Iowans who are more concerned about inflation, immigration, and border security. "So I'm concentrating on policies," he said. Amie, is that his way of changing the subject without offending any Iowans whose votes he's seeking?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's pretty much, he's been pretty good at straddling the line. There are definitely times when you can make a case that he's appealing to that red meat section of his party, and this might be a good time to do it, obviously, looking at election in November. But he's also got to look at the broader base and decide if that's a good idea or not. And maybe in this case, there's enough of the base that he's able to say, okay, let's back off a little bit.
Well, that's it for this edition of On Iowa Politics. If you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends and subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Fan mail may be sent to podcast@thegazette.com. Stay up to date on the Iowa Legislature by subscribing to the Capitol Digest newsletter under the Iowa Legislature tab at thegazette.com. And don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Waterloo Cedar-Falls Courier, Sioux City Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Muscatine Journal, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Item 9 and the Mad Hatters will take us out. If you know an Iowa band or musician who should be on our podcast, send us a sound file and subscribe to On Iowa Politics. For Amie, Erin, Todd, and our producer Stephen, I'm James Lynch. Thanks for listening. Be well.
Get a daily update from the Gazette with our daily news podcast. Add it to your podcast player or your Alexa-friendly device to get a bite-sized local news update each day. Check it out at thegazette.com/podcasts.